Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips, our weekly conversation focused on challenges facing school leaders. As always, I'm Michael Barber, your host here on our Grow Schools channel. Really excited to welcome back a veteran of our conversations on Tuesday Tips. That would be Raj Thakkar from Charter School Business Management. Raj, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks
It's
for
good to
having
have
me.
you back. We appreciate it. For those of you who saw our post about this conversation, you will have noticed that there is one individual who is not joining us today. That would be Dr. Marilaina Palmeri. Unfortunately, she broke her shoulder and has got an orthopedic surgeon appointment on the books for this time. So we're sending her good and healing vibes her way. Hopefully, we'll be able to have her come back on potentially in the new school year to have this conversation again. But again, we're sending her some healing vibes. Today, we're going to talk to Raj about some budget tips for school leaders as you head into the summer. For some of those school leaders, you've probably already braked for the summer. You've got tons of schools in different states breaking this week. And then I think the vast majority of the rest of the country breaks the week after next and next week as well. So we wanted to have a chat about what school leaders should be thinking about as they head into the summer break and as you're wrapping up those budgets. So we'll start here. Raj, of course, as we mentioned, it's early June, the first week of June. What should school leaders be thinking about right now and as they head into the summer as it relates to budgeting?
So the deadlines for budgets vary state to state. So some were due back in April or May, and some are due by the end of June. So assuming that your board has not passed the budget yet, I would take another look at it to make sure that you've represented as many knowns in your budget as possible, and then have reasonable assumptions for all the unknowns. So what do I mean by that? First of all, enrollment going to be based on a real number that's represents the attrition that you've had historically? And where do you tend to fall? Do you go to the worst case scenario number? Do you go to the best case scenario number? Do you go somewhere in between? It depends on how risk averse or risk willing you are. So I would somewhere in between those three. I would go. If you tend to be more conservative, then go in the worst case scenario enrollment figure and make sure you can balance your budget on that. And if you tend to hold your enrollment figures, then go with that. Otherwise, what's your number? What's your usual attrition? Is it 10%? Is it 5%? Is it 15%? Does it look different post-COVID? Just be aware of all those numbers. And then for all of the expense side, you should be pretty firmed up on which staff are returning. So what raise do you plan to give them effective July 1, September 1, whatever the increase date is effective, then you can capture a lot of those knowns. And then is there an increase in your rent if you're paying for your facility, if you don't own it? Are there any escalations that are going on? How has inflation hit your particular school or network? So I would just take a second look and see if it's capturing all these knowns. And I'll pause there.
Yeah, question for you as a follow-up to that one. You mentioned obviously looking at best case, mid case, and worst case scenario when it comes to enrollment. Is it good for school leaders to be considering the variability in their budgets and looking at those scenarios, all three of them, just so that they can react to them as they see those enrollment numbers firm up over the next few months?
A lot depends on the capacity of the finance team, right? So if you've hired well and you have a great person on the team, so I would have these best case and worst case and mid case scenarios laid out. I also like to, this is kind of hopeful, but at the middle of your fiscal year, have some sort of plan just in case you come across extra money that you weren't anticipating. And then if it's good news, it's almost like a wish list, a budget for a wish list, because it serves two purposes. One is if you do have more money than you anticipated, then let's figure out priority wise, what else can we invest in? And then if not, if you don't have the ability, then maybe you're getting a little bit of a jump start on your following year's budget of saying which of these are needs versus wants.
Yeah, such good advice there. I wanted to also do a quick plug. You mentioned something around teacher compensation strategies and looking at those as you consider both cost of living increases and any comp increases that you're doing for the year. We actually have a webinar coming up on 2 days from today on Thursday with the team from Agility Consulting, talking all things teacher compensation strategies. I have dropped that URL into the chat if people want to hop on and register for that. It's completely free. Just tons of good information on how you can build equity and how you can talk about and create teacher compensation strategies. So we'll be talking about that on Thursday. Question number 2 for you. Not sure, what you're hearing. I know you have conversations with school leaders every single day, I would imagine. But we're hearing on boots on the ground that, school leaders are looking at budgets that look increasingly challenging for next year, particularly when they see the end of ESSERs and other, additional government funds, whether it's states or federal government dollars that have been allocated for learning loss and mental health, et cetera, et cetera. What are you seeing out there when it comes to and hearing from school leaders of budget challenges that they may be facing next year and how they're handling them?
So before we go there, I think what I'm also hearing is there's this ton of schools and networks that have not spent down or even close to spending down their ESSER money. So first and foremost, make sure you spend it down by September 30th. That's the easy one, right? It's like the money's there. What the heck, spend it down. All these use it or lose it dollars, we definitely like to see in your month-end reports, your quarter-end reports, how much were you allocated? How much have you spent? How much you have left? And how much time do you have to go through that money, right? So make sure you do that. I think I said this one of the previous sessions, but I can't emphasize it enough. The school leaders and network leaders that have made the harder decisions up front should have an easier time. So the saying is easy, hard, hard, easy. If you don't make the tough decisions now and you take it easy now, it's going to get hard a lot later. And if you make the tough decisions up front, then it should get easier later. So I would ask myself as a school leader or network leader, have we chosen the path of easy, hard, or have we chosen the path of hard, easy? And run it through that filter and see okay, if this, then what? If that, then what? And a lot of times, unfortunately, it comes down to head count and what are those tough decisions that you have to make. And, sometimes it's another thing that comes to mind is repurposing different staff if they're willing, because otherwise you may have a fantastic resource and they were the head of tutoring because of all the learning loss. Maybe they'll be willing to be the reading specialist or the math specialist. Maybe they'll be willing to do some other role, or, just repurposing great resources is something I'm a fan of if the team member is willing. And if it's a round peg, square hole, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Then if they don't want to do it and they're just there for the paycheck, then of course don't do it. But if the willingness is there, then repurposing people is always an option.
Yeah, it's such a good advice to think about how you can repurpose individuals that are on your team, because at the heart of what your school is the people that are there, that are that are interacting with students, that are getting them where they're going. And certainly, if you have to let certain individuals go, that gets at the heart of culture, that gets heart of the heartbeat of the school. So certainly, such a good advice there to think about how certain resources could be repurposed. Let's just pause really quickly for those of you who may be joining us a little bit late. We're here on Grow School's channel for our weekly Tuesday tips. We're here usually every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. We pushed it back 1 hour because of schedules for this conversation, but we're usually here sometime around 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern every week, talking all things school challenges. We've got Raj Thakkar here from CSBM, Charter School Business Management, talking about school tips for school leaders as they head into the summer as it relates to budget. And we'll give him the final question of the day before we wrap up. And that's, as you look at school leaders facing budget problems, and whether it's, spending down ESSER funds or what they're going to be looking at after that September 30th deadline, how can they make sure that, as they head towards the school year, that those budget problems don't become, budget nightmares? I know you talked specifically about zero-based budgeting in the past. You've talked during this conversation today about doing that best, worst, mid-case, worst case scenario. How do school leaders face those budget challenges? What are other tips that you can provide, to get them over the hump as they face maybe what's looking like a tough year next year when it comes to budgets?
So I would make sure that the school leaders and network leaders have a finance team that is really darn good at forecasting. In my opinion, charter schools are easier entities that you can forecast for, because a lot of the spending happens in quarter one. ESSER runs out September 30th. So if you have to buy things for a year or two in advance and you have place to store it, you can do that instead of using it, not using it and losing the money. So getting really good at forecasting, both on an accrual basis and forecasting your cash flow, because if you should be able to see a disaster coming a mile away. If enrollment is tanking, okay, then we have some tough decisions to make. And if enrollment is holding, and then you're going to have more, and you budgeted based on the worst case scenario, and you're holding your mid case or your best case, then you're going to have more money than you realize. And okay, now what are the things from the wish list or that we can actually draw from? And another piece that I talked about was specifically around enrollment and just some high level ideas. I want to make sure that people know where their student enrollment stands at all times, because sometimes they don't know it. And we like to make it a part of the report that every month, every quarter, that where it stands and what is the financial impact of being under-enrolled or over-enrolled. Have your operations team be ready to draw down quickly from the waiting list, because sometimes that lag in time helps you lose people that were on the waiting list. Revisit your enrollment policies. Some schools have a very hard stance on after November 1st, we're not going to enroll anybody because, you get some pushback. You may want to revisit those policies. Some schools are extending their school day. So parents who want to work and need to work all day before picking up their child or otherwise, if you extend your school day, maybe you'll increase your enrollment. You can also increase your family engagement efforts, because if your parents are thrilled with you, then they will be spreading word of mouth to their relatives, their friends. We've seen some schools do some pilots of social media efforts on Facebook, on Instagram, on other websites that can really get the word out, and it's a relatively low cost. Some schools are adding more grade levels, including pre-K. Some are pounding the pavement. Again, these may be things that you're already doing, but just to do a refresher, going to places of worship, going to Head Start programs, playgrounds, making sure your marketing materials are in multiple languages. So, if you're getting migrant students coming in, and then the worst case scenario, if you are still under-enrolled, then possibly merge with another school in your neighborhood that's nearby. And it's like, instead of these two schools shutting down, let's get ahead of this. Let's merge. Let's get the egos out of the way and approach our authorizers about like, hey, can we merge? and we're seeing the writing on the wall. Let's get ahead of this and at least serve parents and students in that way for the greater good.
Such an incredible overview of just, on the ground marketing tactics that schools could be thinking about, those community events, starting to test digital initiatives as well. Just so many good tips there, Raj, as a way to wrap up our conversation. So we'll say this, we appreciate everyone joining us today on Tuesday Tips. Again, we're here every Tuesday, usually around 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, chatting all the biggest challenges that are facing school leaders. We'll give a big shout out and thanks again to Raj for joining us on this Tuesday. We will be back next week with another conversation. And if you've enjoyed this one with Raj, he's got a couple episodes up on our channel that you can check out as well. as a webinar that we did just back a few weeks ago in May. And I know you'll also be at the national conference coming up in just a few weeks with several sessions on a variety of operational topics for school leaders. So hopefully if you are heading to Boston, you'll check out the program tool, search for Raj's name, and you'll be able to add those to all your schedules as well. With that, we'll leave it for today, Raj, and say thank you again and appreciate everyone joining us live. We'll see you next week on Tuesday right here on the Grow Schools channel. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.